The flood of July 2021, with more than 130 deaths and severe destruction, has led to one of the worst environmental disasters in Germany. It did not just hit one village, but a whole valley, posing major challenges for politics, administration, and society, and hence also for spatial planning. Today, I would like to talk about this topic with Jörn Birkmann. Mr. Birkmann is director at the Institute of Spatial and Regional Planning at the University of Stuttgart. He is focusing particularly on issues of sustainable development, urban planning, and climate change adaptation, as well as risk and vulnerability reduction. He is currently involved in the debates on the reconstruction of the Ahr Valley. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Birkmann.
Thanks for the invitation.
Mr. Birkmann, what are the drivers of the disaster impacts and what are the significant damages?
I think what was interesting in the Ahr Valley and also in North Rhine-Westphalia was that the level of destruction was very high, and I think also unexpectedly high. If you would have asked a lot of experts before this event whether there could be a death of more than 160 people, I doubt that a lot of experts would have said that's possible. One of the major drivers, or also determinants of risk, was definitely the heavy precipitation with more than 150 liters per square meter over 24 hours, or even in some places 200 liters in 48 hours. But on the other hand, also the preparedness level of villages, cities were very low, or were not sufficient, for example, to cope with a lot of material. A lot of houses were not prepared for such a flooding.
Through a National Solidarity Fund, up to 30 billion euros are being made available as emergency aid for the victims of the flooding. How can this money be used efficiently, and what are the challenges for reconstruction processes?
Yeah, that's definitely a very complex task. On the one hand, you deal with an entire valley, and I think Germany is in a good position to have national funding made available in a significant amount to reconstruct. But the challenge is we don't want to reconstruct, at least from the scientific perspective and from spatial planning, not only the structures that had been there before. However, if you claim, for example, insurance, or if you want to get a compensation of lost items, you often look at those items which were lost in the event, so the status before. And here I think it's quite essential that the states, but also the federal level, develops incentives on how to better reconstruct or how to develop a more resilient Ahr Valley. And this is just in the starting phase. Moreover, I think we face with the challenge that a lot of good ideas exist, but at the same time, there's a lot of pressure also to rebuild fast. Just giving you an example, we have now mid of October, and a lot of oil heating systems, for example, increased the damages, because if oil runs out, you have a lot of environmental pollution. On the other hand, there's no gas line, and therefore, for example, alternatives are not so easy to find. So here, I think it's important that we have an integrated strategy that maybe allows us to have temporary solutions, but then also long-term strategies.
As you say, time is short. Heating systems need to be rebuilt before winter sets and critical infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. How can solutions be found quickly now? And how are the funds distributed among private households and the public sector?
I know that for Rhineland-Palatinate, this procedure, I think they have asked, I mean, on the one hand, there are a lot of ministries, the Environment Ministry, but particularly the Ministry of Interior, which has a special envoy for the reconstruction process, and also the state president of Rhineland-Palatinate was actively involved in the reconstruction discussion. The challenge is a little bit that definitely now it's getting winter, so actually in 1 month's time you have to have heating system, electricity, and if feasible also communication and streets available, but definitely the destruction is so strong. The roads are destroyed, bridges are destroyed, and the question is, for example, do you rebuild a bridge that function as a wall or as a dam because of a lot of old wood and camping site material that created a major flood wave? So the question is, at the moment, is it actually useful to temporarily rebuild a bridge, or do we have to develop another bridge type that would allow a flood to develop or to run out without such large damages? And in addition, I think there's a need for temporary solutions so that people maybe have some alternative heating systems at the moment, but for the long run, maybe to develop an integrated strategy that would really allow to have a higher protection level for the valley itself, but also for example, issues around climate change mitigation. So here the chance is to actually rebuild, but also hopefully to integrate further protection measures and measures to contribute to other goals like CO2 reduction. Maybe more concretely, if you want to have an example, there are also discussions, for example, if you have had a school, there was a school building that has just one floor, one ground floor close to the Ahr Valley. The flood wave was about 10 to 12 meters on the highest part, also due to these barriers. If we now rebuild just the school as a building, I think we would reconstruct the high vulnerability and high exposure of people, or an elderly home, more than 10 people died. Here, I think we have to install in this terms of critical infrastructures, higher level or higher standards for protection in the future. Otherwise, we would just rebuild the old structures that have been proven to be insufficient or had created a lot of harm and damage in the past. But it's not a very easy task, to be honest. If I would be mayor, which I'm not the case, then definitely you have the stress that you don't want to lose population. You cannot ask the population to live in a van for 2 years and then come back if the city is nicely rebuilt. So here, these temporary solutions are important. And also there are some people who would like actually to relocate. But if you don't have alternative housing sites, it's quite difficult actually to get that organized.
How are the mentioned solution options communicated? I mean, how does cooperation and communication work when not just one village, but a whole valley is affected?
It was interesting to see. I mean, normally, I think in a lot of other crises, we have the same challenge that a lot of actors are active, which is also actually good. It would be somehow harmful if we all wait for the federal level that somebody sends us money or gets something done. So a lot of private initiatives were also taken were implemented during the first months after the flooding. So the cleaning of buildings, the demolition part, this all has involved a lot of voluntary groups and people. However, I think if we now get into the question how to ensure that one village and the other village are also cooperating in terms of flood protection, resilient reconstruction, I think it's important that there are at the same time coordination activities, and at least for Rhineland-Palatinate, I think there were quite good starting points. For example, these conferences where future activities and compensation schemes were explained. State Bank explained how to actually apply for the compensation. So here real schemes are in place, and there are also coordinated efforts, for example, with engineers and with architects, so that prices are not going up too high. However, I think there's definitely a challenge that on the one hand, there's the need for private engagement, private activities. On the other hand, you have to create these enabling environments to promote more sustainable and resilient reconstruction. So that means, for example, for state-owned or community-owned buildings like schools, hospitals, infrastructures, communal infrastructures, here this higher level of protection should be ensured. But it's still a challenge. For example, also the question, if you have now an insurance, if you had an insurance for this heavy rain and flooding, is insurance actually paying you a better standard, or is it just compensating the losses you had? If you had an oil heating system, it's not the best idea to reinstall an oil heating system, but is the insurance industry actually paying you for gas or for alternative energy system or heating system? Similarly, if you think about window reconstruction, here you need to have a higher standard. You have to have a better protection in an individual building, but at the same time, you need space for the river. So how to deal with these kind of two challenges, individual preparedness, but also community, regional preparedness.
Talking about compensation measures and insurance, how to deal with people that want to move, but do not necessarily need to because their property lies outside the flood lines. Are they allowed to rebuild in a different area?
Yeah, that was an interesting discussion with a lot of mayors of the Ahr Valley in the second Future Conference that took place in end of September this year. And for example, they developed, probably I cannot really show it very well, but for example, for some city parts here, Resch, you see red and blue lines, and they, for example, also marked areas where reconstruction is not allowed. But beside the question where reconstruction is not allowed, the question is how many people want to move from the river, even if they are not in the flood protection zone, back towards another place. And this definitely differs from community or from city to city. or village to village in the Ahr Valley, because in some cases you have alternative sites where you can directly say, okay, this building plot is available within whatever, half a year or a year, and the connection, for example, to water, sanitation, electricity can be granted and provided within 9 months. But there may be also some sites where the slope or etc. is so strong that it's unlikely that you can directly identify an area for alternative housing or commercial sites. So here, I think, again, this idea of a cooperation, of an integrated strategy for the entire Ahr Valley is very important. I think the individual initiatives are also very good, but they focus on your individual building, individual community, and therefore I think there's a need for the state and also for the county to stronger promote these integrated views and measures for reconstruction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Birkmann, for these very valuable insights and for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bockhorn.